The Don Crow Show on WAVA. My guest this hour, as many of you already know, is one of our nation's most respected Christian leaders today. Deeply appreciated, respected as a pastor and teacher, an author, speaker. And I don't say these words lightly, folks. He's blessed my life, whether he knows it or not, through the years with his writings and his speaking. He's a man of God with unique ability to communicate the gospel and open the scriptures in ways that are profoundly simple and end up being simply profound. I really mean that. Senior pastor of Oak Cliff Bible Fellowship, Dallas, Texas, president of the Urban Alternative, and his is the voice that you hear on The Alternative with Dr. Tony Evans right here on WAVA, 3:30 a.m., 10:30 a.m. every day, Monday through Friday. Saturdays, 10 a.m., 1 p.m., and 9:30 p.m. each Saturday. Dr. Evans, an honor, as always, to welcome you to the show. Thank you for taking time.
Oh, well, it's always good to be with you. I look forward every time that we're able to connect.
Well, we need to hear from men like you as never before, and I've said it from the outset of this whole tragic event with George Floyd and all that's followed, that we need especially to hear from men such as yourself from the African-American community. You have a frame of reference and a background understanding that I cannot possibly address, as sympathetic as I have been and am to the issues. So give us your own reaction initially to what happened, and sadly, the fact that it's not a one-off at all. It's been happening far too often, far too long. What do you think?
Well, I mean, the problem and the reality is there. From my own personal experience, I know what it is to be stopped by a police and ask, what are you doing in this neighborhood? You know, I have to have a talk with my grandsons about going overboard as African-American men, because you don't know the anger or the mindset of a particular policeman who pulls you over. And this is a common reality that if you don't experience it, then it's foreign to you. So there are many individual stories I can give you, but there are also systems, even in the Christian community, where the discrimination based on race is practiced. I mean, I went to Dallas Seminary. I was the first African American to earn a doctorate from Dallas Seminary. But if I would have applied a few years before I did, they would not have let me in because of the laws of segregation. The only reason I'm on radio is James Dobson intervened because the radio stations told me that a black speaker would be too offensive to their white listeners. And so he intervened, and that opened up some doors. So and I could go on and on. When I was in college in Atlanta, I walked in with one of my professors to a white church, and they let it be known that, I was not welcome there. And this was one of the leading churches in the Atlanta, Georgia area. So both personally and through systems, even in the Christian community, what we need to understand. Is our problem. We talk about race, we talk about, injustice, and all that's real, but it emanates from a theological first and not a sociological reality. And that is, in 2 Chronicles 15, it says, because there was a departure from God, it says there was no peace in the land. And then it says in verse 6, for God troubled them with every kind of distress. Now, if God is your problem, I don't care what programs you come up with, how many marches you do, how many protests you make, or how many adjustments you seek to make. If God is your problem, then you got to get him back in sync. And the only reason This problem has existed this deep for this long as the failure of the church. If the church had not endorsed the slavery, if the church had not endorsed, and this is evangelicals, people we celebrate, if they had not endorsed segregation, Jim Crow, and many of the systems, then they would not have been adopted and perpetuated in the culture. So since the church contributed to this mess, the church has got to fix it, because God's not going to skip the church house to fix the White House.
Oh, you're right on target in my view as someone who's worked in church life my whole life. And I've said it from this show earlier. Thank God I had parents who didn't have a racial prejudice bone in their bodies. So it was never an issue in our home. But it does underscore the fact that has often been said, racism of any sort is never something that's caught, if you will, genetically. It is really taught and inculcated by a culture, and the church has been very guilty in that regard, I think, in many fronts. And if I may, I'm going to quote just a sentence from something that someone shared with me that I believe you put up on a Facebook page recently. You said a reset not based on societal patchwork, which produces no long-term impact, but rather on a spiritual foundation influenced by a repentant, obedient, and unified church. And I said it to Harry Jackson just a few minutes ago. My lifelong conviction, Dr. Evans, has been that the church is responsible for the culture, that either the church is shaping the culture or the culture is shaping the church, and we are much more responsible for these conditions, I believe, as a church than we are willing to acknowledge.
Yeah, I don't think we realize it. I don't think enough pulpits are proclaiming it, enough accountability has been inculcating it. Hey, our problem, Don, is that we don't have enough kingdom disciples. We just have Christians, okay? We have folks who are on their way to heaven who don't know how to live their full orbs Christian life on earth. And so we pick and choose the areas where we want to be Christian, and the others we shift from being a Christian to be cultural. And so, to be black is not beautiful unless it's biblical, and to be white is not right unless it agrees with what's written. And so until we take that kind of radical stance on justice and righteousness, Psalm 89:14 says, from his throne comes justice and righteousness. So you don't pick and choose between the two. They're not a seesaw you go up and down with. They're Siamese twins. They're joined at the hip. And you must be right before God, but equitable among men. And if you don't do both, you have exited God from involvement in the issue.
We're going to come back with more with Dr. Tony Evans. Stay with us. The Don Crow Show on WAVA, talking with Dr. Tony Evans about what our country is facing right now. There's so many different areas that need to be addressed, but there are core issues. And Dr. Evans, talk about the system itself, if you will. I talked with Bob Woodson earlier of the Woodson Center, and he pointed out that there, through the years, have been Democrats who were promising a lot even black Democrats promising a lot, but that finally it didn't work out that way. The system began to work against those for whom it was intended. So what do we do with the governmental structures that are given by God as at least tools for us to effect some of the changes that must be made?
Well, first of all, I always start with the Bible. So let's start with the biblical definition of civil government. The biblical role of civil government is to maintain a safe, just, righteous, and compassionately responsible environment for freedom to flourish. When God established government in the garden, he had maximum freedom from every tree you may eat, limited regulation. One tree you can eat, dire consequences. You shall surely die. So God had a system. That system was then expanded with the same principle in Israel. And that would be the system of Romans 13 that every government should operate off of. So the principle is this. The closer a government is to God's definition of civil government, the more ordered the society will be. The further God's principles are from a civil government, the more chaotic the environment will become. And the Great Society program of Lyndon Baines Johnson was certainly well-intentioned. It was desired to get people out of poverty. But what it inadvertently did, and expand dependency. Mm-hmm. And when dependency overrules responsibility, you have decrease in people's lives and not enhancement in people's lives, because now you have a false parent parenting the person, and that is the government. The government is never to replace the personal responsibility of family, or responsibility of the church. but there to be a stopgap and a net for when those fail. They're not to try to circumvent any of them.
And on that latter point, I'm so glad you said that. The church's role really historically in this country was primarily the source of charity and good works in the culture, which was part of what justified its existence as a tax-exempt entity, right?
Well, absolutely. You know, I make a statement in my book on race, Oneness Embrace, that I make this statement. I say that the black church in slavery was probably the greatest illustration of biblical Christianity in the history of America. There was no government support. There were no federal programs. But it not only hewed out a faith order, it built schools and newspapers and banks and educational institutions. It did all of that because it had a faith foundation that trumped the evil system of slavery that held it hostage. So if the African American church could do that in slavery, what could the Church of Jesus Christ across racial lines do today if we decided to be full-time Christians and not part-time saints?
Well, it seems to me, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's really the driving force and philosophy that you have practiced through the years through the Urban Alternative. Am I right?
Well, yeah, we're fostering this worldview all across the country.
Yeah.
We're trying to we have a 3-point plan. We trying to get community of churches together who are biblically minded to have, one, a solemn assembly, a sacred gathering at the same time in the same place where there's fasting and prayer. Secondly, where they are now influenced to move people to comprehensive discipleship, not just personal discipleship. We're to disciple the nations, not just individuals. Then thirdly, to have collective good works where every school is adopted by a church, or every police precinct is adopted by a group of churches, or every fire station is adopted. So we have a presence in the community doing good works, becoming servants, praying, sharing the gospel, but people can see us. We are to be salt of the earth, not salt of the shaker. We're to be light of the world, not light of the bulb. So our job is to demonstrate the visibility of Christianity while we verbalize it.
Before we have to go this last quick break, I just got a piece of news today. Montgomery County Council here in Maryland is considering dissolving its police department. Other areas are flirting with that idea as well. I think Minneapolis, one of them, either defunding the police altogether or in some cases considering eliminating them altogether. It seems to me that is going to be highly damaging if that idea ever takes root. What do you think?
I think damaging is a light word. That's a disastrous.
Yeah.
You must have order. You must have justice, but you must have order. The police are designed to enforce the law so that we can live safely. Now, are there reforms needed in places? Absolutely. Do people need to know how to relate to people who are different than they are and have different orientation? Absolutely. But what you don't do is deconstruct the system that is necessary to keep people safe, because you cannot flourish personally, economically, or familiarly if you're not safe to do so, and that makes the police force righteously done essential.
One more quick break, come back, a couple of more points that I want to have Dr. Evans comment on, and we'll be back. The Don Crow Show on WAVA. A couple of more minutes with Dr. Tony Evans. And Dr. Evans, a couple of more points that you made on that Facebook piece that someone so kindly shared with me. You said this is the time to build a better tomorrow, not tear down. Speak to the destruction. We know there are outside forces as well that are trying to use this to hurt our country with all of this radical violence. Any of us, I think, who are thinking people support the right to protest, but within reason. Talk about that issue.
Well, the Bible gives us right to protest. In Acts chapter 16, Paul was in prison illegally as a Roman citizen, and he protested. He did the first biblical sit-in. He would not allow them to treat him unjustly, and because there were laws that protected him, and he utilized those laws for his favor, and that was a righteous act to take. So God's not against righteous protesting. He's against unrighteous protesting. And when it is mixed with violence, when it is mixed with theft, when it is mixed with destruction, then it is not a biblical protest. It is an unrighteous protest, and we need to make the distinction between the two.
And we need to join others, either if we choose to visibly and physically, peaceful protest, or at least certainly in our own ways of advocacy. What I hear you saying in this piece is that we need to own the problem ourselves, even if it's not our personal problem. Would you agree?
Well, Absolutely, because this is a family issue. We're supposed to laugh with those who laugh and weep with those who weep. There are brothers of color who are weeping because some of these issues are very real. Our brothers who are not facing that dilemma should weep with us and us with them to show the unified body of Christ when it moves forward faithfully under the rule of God.
Last and finally, I think most appropriately, resource and recourse to prayer itself. It's easy to say it, but there's no more powerful weapon in the world. You've written wonderfully on it through the years. I've drawn on that myself for our congregation, but talk about some of the things that we do need to pray about. Some people saying, I don't even know how to pray about this situation.
All right. Well, first of all, we have to pray God's thoughts after him. We often pray our desires, but our desires have to be plugged into his worldview. So we're not just asking God to bless what we want. We're asking God to take our prayers and accomplish through us his will in history as it is dictated to from heaven. And until we are praying like that on his terms and not on our desires, we don't pray with authority. And without authority, you can't get the benefits that God wants to bring into history.
And if there's anything that the church needs, and we say it a lot to the point that I'm concerned it become trite, the church really does need to display a visible physical unity, not just token unity, but how do we bring that about?
Well, first of all, we have unity through service, not through seminars. You get with people different than you, and together you go serve somebody else worse off than you. And when you do that, now you're getting to know each other as you're helping somebody else. And that's authentic reconciliation, not just having classes on it.
Thank you for the honor of having you on the show. We're really blessed by all that you do, and especially to talk briefly about it. And anytime you get an urge to speak to our listeners, we'd love to make that available to you.
Thank you very much, and God bless you. Thank you for your great work.
Dr. Tony Evans, thanks for being with us today.